Good, so I think we're ready to get started. I'm Eric Feldman from the law school, but today representing the Center for East Asian Studies. With thanks to both Center for East Asian Studies and the director, Fred Dickinson, who's here, the School of Design at Penn, the Weitzman School, and the Chair of Architecture, Winkle Dubbeldam, and the Japan Foundation for helping to underwrite this. This is the fourth and final talk in the Contemporary Issues, our Global Issues series that we run that connects Japan to broader issues globally. And it's really a testament to Professor Abe and his work that as we thought through how we might connect the School of Design and the Center for East Asian Studies, it was clear that there was one person in particular who would be ideal in doing that. This is, I think, the first time, at least in my tenure at Penn, that we've had a joint event between Asian Studies and architecture. I hope it's not the last time, and so I look forward to more collaborations. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Professor Dubbeldam, and with thanks to Professor Abe, very much looking forward to the evening.
Thank you, everyone. It's a great pleasure. I second the enthusiasm for our collaboration. I also want to say welcome to our online Zoom public that is here. This is live streamed in Hitoshi, so that you know that. To introduce you, Hitoshi is a very long friend, colleague, and we have gone through many Rumble and other adventures, Cartagena adventures together. But more importantly, Hitoshi is the principal of Atelier Hitoshi Abe. He's also the director of the UCLA Paul I Hisako Terasaki Center for Japanese Studies, and is the former chair, of course, and I know him mostly in that role, in the Department of Architecture at UCLA. But since 1992, when Dr. Abe won the first prize in the Miyagi Stadium Competition and established Atelier Hitoshi Abe, he has maintained an active international design practice based in Sendai, Japan, and opened a second office, of course, in LA in 2008. The firm's most recent works include a departmental building on the new campus of the Vienna University of Economics and Business, and the 3M headquarters in St. Paul, Minnesota, hot links for Brad Pitt's Make It Right Foundation in the lower 9th Ward in New Orleans, and the Terasaki Research Center in Westwood, Los Angeles. In 2011, together with a group of Japanese architects, Hitoshi initiated the Archaea network, a voluntary network of architects established to help reconstruct the damaged community by the 2011 East Japan Great Earthquake and Tsunami. In 2017, he opened the X-Lab Research Center at UCLA, which serves as an international think tank that examines architecture's elastic boundaries through interdisciplinary collaboration. We shared some of the faculty with Hitoshi. Atelier Hitoshi Abe, known for architecture that is spatially complex and structurally innovative, has been published internationally and received numerous awards worldwide, including the 2011 Japan Society of Finishing Technology Award for the F-Town building, the 2009 Architectural Institute of Japan Award for the Kano Museum, the 2007 World Architecture Award for the Kano Museum. Did I say that twice? No, there's actually twice. You got that twice. That's nice. In 2021, Dr. Abe received the 2011 Foreign Minister's Commendation. They are awarded to individuals and groups of outstanding achievements in international fields to acknowledge their contribution for the promotion of friendship between Japan and other countries. Atelier Hitoshi Abe's work is the subject of 2 monographs. One is Hitoshi Abe Flicker from his exhibit in 2005 at Gallery Ma in Tokyo, and Hitoshi Abe published by Faiden in 2009. I want to thank the Center of East Asian Studies for this great collaboration, and I welcome Hitoshi for joining us and look forward to your lecture, Hitoshi.
Well, thank you, Winka. It's kind of nice to come out, and this is the first kind of a talk I do in person after 2 years of silence due to the COVID. So first of all, I'd like to say thank you to the Center for East Asian Studies and also Weitzman School of Design and Japan Foundation and Forum for Japan for the invitation and opportunity to talk about my experience in the reconstruction process of Tohoku. I was born and raised and educated in Sendai, the city closest to the epicenter of the Great East Japan earthquake on March 11th, 2011. I was a professor at the Tohoku University, and my practice was primarily based in this area. But I did not experience the earthquake directly as I moved to Los Angeles in 2007 to lead the architecture department at UCLA. So I experienced it indirectly through my family, my staff, friends, etc. So even though I was physically in safe California, it was kind of horrible experience psychologically, sort of not to be able to know how my family was doing and what was happening in my office there. And I could not really reach to them for 3 days. So then you see lots of horrible images on the media, and it was really painful. I felt like half of my body is in a cold bathtub and the other half is on the really hot bath, and just freaked me out. And after 3 days, I think I finally could connect to my brother. So the experience was really tough for everybody who was living there, but also who are related to that community. So let's see how it was. This video was made by a local newspaper. So the taste-wise, it's a little bit, kind of too much, but still it's enough to tell the devastation of the disaster itself. So it was a magnitude of 9. Strongest earthquake ever recorded in Japan and 4th largest recorded in the world. And that's an area called Tohoku, northeast Japan, it means. And as you know, that after the earthquake, there's a massive tsunami attacked that coastline. And because actually that coastline is known as sawtooth shape, that accelerated the actually tsunami and
地震が発生
caused
してからね、
massive
20
destruction.
分ぐらいに水面がすごく上がり始めて、港がまず見えなくなった。でさらにそれから10分ぐらい経つと今度は水がどんどん引いていくんですね。 ですからその地震発生から40分ぐらい経って海峡が空になって間もなく南と北からすごい音を立てて津波が押し寄せてきて目の前で大衝突をしたという、やっぱりそれを見た時はですね、膝がガクガクして現実のものかどうか信じられなかったですね。
So this is an area affected by tsunami, and as you can see, right, the really zigzag shape. So when the water gets pushed against such a narrow bay, then the height of the water is accelerated. So it went up to 30-meter high, which is about 10-story high building, and it created really horrible destruction along the coastline. And and as you know, that also that triggered a big problem in Fukushima, which is still affecting the area. So back then, this is the damage, list of the damages. Fatality, 15,000 about, missing 4,000, and the structural damage is massive, and debris was 23 million tons, of which I have no idea how much it is. It's hard to sense such things. And then the economic damage is 16 to 25 trillion Japanese yen. So that's quarter of the annual national budget, but probably it went up more. So 11 years have passed since the Great East Japan earthquake, and in order to reconstruct its community, so many efforts and resources were poured into the coastal area of Tohoku, devastated by the massive earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear power plant accident. I have been involved in the region's reconstruction through my practice in Sendai, and today I'd like to share my view about the reconstruction process and discuss its relationship with the community through my own experience and work. As you know, that the final objective of the reconstruction is not about actually just recovery of the physical environment. It is more important to reconstruct and revitalize the community of the people there. So while I review what has happened in the past 11 years there, I came up with a somewhat naive hypothesis about the mentality driving the process and being an essential factor in the reconstruction of the community in Tohoku. It is called Wa. Oops. So again, it's a very common notion for anybody who knows about Japan. Wikipedia says the Wa meaning the old name of Japan, a cultural concept meaning Japan, and it means harmony, peace, balance, not to contend, and peace negotiations, the result of addition. Like if you add up the numbers, that's the result. And it means the Wa meaning the total of numbers that you add up to. And the idea of war is already shared among really common words, and almost like a hackneyed notion by many people familiar with Japanese culture. I mean, people like you knows this. And I think this mentality of Japanese society to push everything to harmony unconsciously played a vital role in surviving under devastating confusion after the disaster and initiating the reconstruction process. Not sometimes good way, but sometimes not in a good way. So everything starts March 11th. And many people have to help each other to survive. And this is the first day in the shelter, and you can see how overly crowded. So the recovery process in Japan has kind of a unique sort of timeline. Just this 2 weeks has been some kind of important dates. So that, as you can see, electricity recovered kind of quickly, but the water supply and the gas supply needed 2 weeks to recover. Gasoline station, gas was not available. So in order to have gas also being back, it took 2 weeks. Also, the emergency feed water treatment was necessary for 2 weeks. So how to survive these 2 weeks was the important thing in Japan. In the other words, that the Japanese community or the society needed 2 weeks. That means during 2 weeks, there's no sort of support, and people had to somehow find a way to survive. And this is also showing the shelter occupancy rate. And as you can see, the line here, I don't know if there's any laser pointer here. Oh yeah, this one. Here, this is a line of the capacity. So you can see about 2 weeks, the whole shelter was overly crowded. Under this kind of a confusing, very difficult time, maybe you remember that many foreign press was actually praising these Japanese people who is making lines and maintaining sort of a order. And what I was really wondering, there's no government, there's no sort of top-down sort of a mechanism or system to control this, but it's just happening, just naturally as if this is a usual thing. But you know, people on this line is waiting for like 6 hours to get the gasoline or to get the bottled water and so on. And the only reason that I can think of is this kind of a sense of harmony, or somehow the people are not really looking at the larger system, but the relationship between people in front of you and behind of you, and kind of having, maybe being in this kind of a monocultural society, kind of determine the way you behave. And then somehow, instead of following this kind of given role or given rule, you kind of create your own rule relatively in relationship with the people around you. Otherwise, you know, you can't really tell. There's always lying everywhere. Also, interesting thing is, as you know, that when this kind of incident happens, there's no food. Supply chain is stopped. There's no sort of a supermarket functioning. There's no convenience store functioning. Everything became empty. And then obviously, you know, there's a lot of sort of supplies stuck in some warehouses or somewhere waiting for somebody who can come to pick it up. And what happened was, instead of those large sort of a national-wide chain, these individuals started to actually go out and pick up those goods in a storage or at the farmer's shop or at the fisherman's village. They collected it and then distributed individually and then provided it. So when I spoke with my friends in Sendai during that time, they said, yeah, there's nothing in a supermarket, but you can buy these stuff at the small papa and mama store. There's a lots of things happening. It's just simply this kind of a network of the individual autonomously kind of started to they started to supplement the bigger system, which is not functioning. Same here, you see this kind of an informal sort of a market started to rise, and then you see that lots of people waiting. Same here. Also, the information started to be very, very strange. If you watch media, like a major media, only thing they deliver is a devastation of the event. So they talks about how much damage was and how horrible it is, but don't really provide the information that necessary for residents to survive. So the Twitter actually was the biggest sort of a source of information for people to actually know where you can find the toilet paper, where you can find the bottle of water. Just think, if you don't have any access to the public transportation or the car, then there's a supermarket maybe 10 minutes drive that you used to go. But that 10 minutes drive becomes a big problem. And then if you go there, then there's nothing there you can buy, then you waste maybe a couple of hours. But if there's some information on Twitter saying that, oh, there's a, meat there, there's a milk there, then you can make a decision about your next action. So all of a sudden, this kind of voluntary sort of a network of information started to rise and then helped. Even the paper, they put the, how do you call this, wallpaper, wall newspaper on the corner of the street, telling actually who was here, or Mom, I'm here, or I'm there, so that it started to become very interesting sort of informal communication, and that also helps. So all of these are kind of connected to some interesting sort of a network of the people, which is more sort of informal and more bottom-up. So in the weeks immediately after the earthquake, people in Tohoku reorganized their life by assembling this kind of a small, disparate system here and there based on their connections amongst the chaos and disintegration of the centralized system that was supposed to support the contemporary society. So the whole thing was in a mess. So this small system, which were supposed to be a temporary measure for emergency, showed surprising autonomy and strength, helping many people's lives in the most challenging circumstances. And the flexible and robust literacy-based order that governed people through a small chain of connections supported everyone. And I don't know, I didn't know what to say, so I thought that we should just call this as a wa. Somehow, this kind of a mentality that the Japanese has, trying to somehow create the harmony and to help each other. Maybe it's a little bit cliche to talk this way, but I thought this is an interesting sort of a phenomena raised in this kind of a horrible moment. So there was a kind of a idea or hope, maybe the bottom-up sort of a system can help to survive through this difficult time. So architects started to think about this approach. And of course, Shigeru Ban started to do this kind of a voluntary work to help victims. So he provided a petition for the shelter, and people like also Toyo Ito started to propose House for All. But you can see that the House for All is also the idea to actually provide the meeting place for the community to reinforce their sort of relationship their work by actually creating this kind of a symbolic sort of a facility funded by the donation. So we started Archaea. Actually, we started this Archaea on March 13th, 2 days after the earthquake. And just simply, the Archaea is an idea to create a network of architects to help the community to come up with their sort of future plan. And in this kind of a situation, it's really hard for the local community to actually think about the future and to come up with a sort of a, how to say, sort of a future environment where they want to be while they are trying to survive day-to-day obstacles. So, but also at the same time, the government tend to actually have much bigger sort of a top-down system to kind of enforce their vision. So we try to mediate this top-down and a bottom-up situation and then worked with the residents. So 200 architects gathered, and we had 3 objectives. One is to create the multifaceted platform to support the regional reconstruction and development. And also many of these schools were damaged, so we wanted to revitalize the architectural education in the area. And also we wanted to collect and accumulate the knowledge against disaster. And then we initiated the seminars, and also we actually brought the student on site, worked with the residents, and then initiated the workshop, and then also designed so many plans to basically draw the future of the community. And these are the areas that we worked. And especially we spent a lot of time in Osika Peninsula. And there are professors, actually most of the architects who worked with us are the architects who's been teaching, so it was easy for them to bring students. And this is Osika Peninsula, communication with the local people, and it's kind of hard to talk about this one, but you can see the different, this is actually the development proposed by the Japanese government. And this is a proposal by Archaea. So most of the case what we trying to achieve was, instead of having this kind of a cookie cutter development, which requires lots of change in the landscape and the scenery, we try to kind of work with a local condition and context, and try to counter against these sort of a government initiating top-down proposals. And then we published the book, and some project was realized this is a core house by a tree bow wow. It's alternative kind of a dwelling for the fisherman's village. Also, we try to help actually the region by proposing and helping to create the competition for the public facilities. In this kind of a situation, it's easy for the government to kind of build something the way it was, but then it doesn't have any sort of a sort of push towards the future and how this area could be beyond the reconstruction of what it was. So we actually worked with the local government and then set the public competition, and there are a couple of buildings being built such as nursery school or junior high school, so that it's designed not only to build what it was, but it was built towards the future of this area. But then we ended Archaea 2016, 5 years after the disaster. The reason we stopped Archaea is actually the 5-year is a term determined by the Japanese government for the period of Reconstruction. And we did not want to continue this voluntary network for the sake of continuing it. So we actually, when we started it, we decided that this Archaea should actually be run only for 5 years. Then after that, everything should be turned into more professional work so that people can sustainably be involved. And so at the end, we kind of published this thick book introducing every effort we've done and hoping that this will be used for the future reconstruction. So let me just explain actually how actual reconstruction was initiated by the government. Archaea approach was quite interesting, but the problem was, you don't have a power, you don't have a political sort of a, how to say, the strength to push it through. So most of the case we lost the battle, so that we had to follow the plan proposed by the Japanese government. And some cases we could kind of push it back a little bit to make it better. But basically 2017, the end of the reconstruction period, still there are refugees, about 123,000. People living in a temporary housing was 33,000. And so it was not sort of really nearly the end of the reconstruction, but this is how it was. The idea of reconstruction is very simple. So this is something that maybe it's good to know. Tsunami was a problem. So they determined the tsunami into 2 categories. L1, tsunami happens 30 to 100 year cycle. L2 happens 400 to 1,000 year cycle. And then they decided to build the seawall against the L1 tsunami. And then let the L2 tsunami go. So they know that if the water goes more than 2 meters, then there's a destruction of the building. But if it's less than 2 meters, it will not affect the building. So they actually determined this 2-2 line, meaning L2, 2 meters. So then beyond this line, you can build residential projects. But before this line, there's no residential project allowed. And also because of the lesson learned from the tsunami, which basically destroyed all the seawall, they decided then to create the seawall in this new section, which is very strong against the energy of the wave. So if you just imagine how wide this could be, depending on the height, this takes over the entire coastline. But this logic become the sort of a basic principle to do the reconstruction of the area. So problem is though, this formula changes depending on the shape of the landscape. So if the coastline is narrow, the height of the L1 tsunami gets higher. That means sometimes the entire sort of area can be inhabitable. And this is actually the basic method that the Japanese government decided to take. So reconstruction of the seawall, this is a line for non-habitable area. And then they basically relocate the, the residential area, or they actually raise the entire city to reduce the risk of tsunami. So what happened was, because everybody is so worried about the tsunami, they decided to build a seawall for about 400 kilometers, which is $14 billion project. And it's like this. So as you can see that because of the shape of the new seawall, it takes up the most of the beach area. And sometimes actually you see the wall separating your area from the ocean. And this is basically what's going on, but then also Japanese government actually said this is not something you have to do. There's a certain way to negotiate. And this is a kind of research done by my friend Professor Onoda, who worked with this area. And maybe so we can compare with a case of Kamaishi, Rikuzen Takada, and Ogatsu. This is the Ogatsu area, and then you can see how kind of deep this kind of coastline is. This is how it was. So you can see all the residential, they create the sort of nice streets and then small villages along this bay. But after that, everything was destroyed. So based on the rule that they really followed the rule proposed by the government. And what happened was then, you can see there's nothing here. They have to concentrate whatever left there. That killed the entire sort of a historical relationship and a culture, and then a whole town, which used to be more lively, known for their production of the slate, became something like this. Because just simply they follow the top-down decision. And the case of Rikuzen Takada, look at this huge wall, but then not only this, they raised the whole town by almost 10 meter, 8 meter. And because also, actually this area was known for active city and a historical town separated by this river, but it seems like a mayor came from this area, so there's more development there. They pour a lot of money there. And then the lively town used to be like this, with lots of small buildings, with little narrow streets, became something more like a shopping mall. Or Kamaishi, actually Kamaishi is an area that the architect came in and collaborated with the residents. So instead of raising anything, they decided to make this kind of a green mound, which is a more different from seawall. It's like an earth landscape to protect the central area. They went through several workshops, and then you can see Toyo Ito here. And then they communicated, and then they tried to alter the top-down plan, and then changed it. So it's less actually maybe strong against the tsunami, but more flexible. So this one somehow kind of kept the vitality of the city, and it's known as one of the very successful case because of the involvement of the residents. This is Natori and Iwanuma, and right next to each other, but they went to the very opposite approach. City of Natori proposed this kind of a top-down development, which is crazy. This is like a huge sort of a strong seawall and having a very sort of a civil engineering protected sort of business area with this new town. And he's the architect. And then the Iwanuma took the bottom-up approach by communicating with a resident. And Natori, Iwanuma, and you can see the difference is that this is more like a public hearing. Architects are explaining, governments are explaining what's going to happen versus the workshop-based development. And then what happened was, because everything went over budget and the whole thing collapsed, and then this is how it is. And the Iwanuma is more, maybe this is more banner kind of proposal, but you can see the difference between top-down development and the sort of a top-down and bottom-up development. So what has happened in Tohoku is that the harmony also implies that the obedience to the system, so that the people wants to work with the government, wants to obedient or follow the instruction. But most of the case that the resident followed with the top-down decisions without any communication ended up as a kind of a failure. And many cases that the active sort of involvement of the students, I'm not the student, involvement of the resident happened actually brought the project to the more success, which is somehow, you don't have to maybe talk about it in a lecture, but it's really happened in the reality of Tohoku. So in the case of then a scale of architecture, what happened, the problem was people never wanted to go back to the area. As you can see here, 80% of the people are unsure if they want to go back to where they used to. And this is a number of the people who left the area. And if you look at the way people move, the day one, many people go to the shelter, and then they have a lot of sort of way to kind of stay. But unless you have a secure home, people get out and move to the different region. And towards the end, it is very important to have temporary housing secured, but then also to have a subsidized rental housing, but most importantly, to have government-funded recovery housing to give the permanent home. So they actually plan to build 30,000 units. And at the end of the 5-year reconstruction, they could make actually 19,000 units. And most of the recovery housing is like this. So it's a huge sort of apartment with one corridor and then facing all the unit to the south. One of the big problems of this kind of recovery housing, which is social housing, is that the percentage of the old people living As you can see that the percentage of the people who is older than 65 years old is nearly 40% or, and that creates actually huge problem, especially there are so many elderlies who is living there alone. And it's 25% of the people are there living alone. And the number of solitary deaths started to become the problem. And as you can see, you know the solitary deaths, right? So the people die and then people don't know actually that person already passed away. And this has become big problem. And these actually housing could not really help. So there's a discussion about if there's any sort of a way that the architecturally resolve this problem, or at least improve the situation. So we actually tried, it was one of the big issues for architect to design such kind of an environment to avoid solitary deaths and encourage people to communicate, to kind of recover the relationship within the community. So this is one of the prototype that we try. So first of all, sorry, it's in Japanese, but we try to take out the large portion of the each individual floor area to be used for the common use. So you have a very minimal sort of an individual unit, but you have a much larger common unit, common space. And also we decided to design the community beforehand by actually selecting the kind of people who might be suitable to this community. So this is a design of the prototype. It's a little bit difficult to understand, but there's a sort of a 3 layers of the community. So this area with a dark blue along the, let's say this is first floor, second floor, third floor, and there's a circulation, and then we will have a much older people around this sort of area near the vertical circulation. And then we also trying to encourage the community on the same level by putting some sort of a common space. And then also we actually intentionally put in the children and old children and then also the old parents units, which is kind of close. So there's a couple, actually the families are living close by. And also we created some sort of a unit who will be in charge of activating the community. So this design community was in place. Also the biggest thing that we had to do architecturally was to, like this is a typical sort of apartment. And then you kind of enter from the back and then each units are open to south. But this one creates a big isolation among each unit. So instead of having such kind of how to say, the back entry where the dark entrance is, and then you have a bright sort of a living room, but just open to the air. We started to design so-called a living access so that the people will come to the house from brighter side, from the living area. So you can kind of see what's going on in this unit. So that might help to create the interesting sort of interaction among the different people who is sharing this housing. So how to make such kind of gradual kind of a openness in this kind of a housing has become a big sort of a issue. And also we started to design different way to interact people when you arrive and then as you go through the building. So this is a plan. And you can see these stairs and then this unit goes in this way, it goes in this way, and then there's in the middle, there's a common area where there are lots of terraces are open to the public. This is each unit. This is a sort of a common shared house, a shared room. And then this is also each unit has this common sort of area run by the organizer. This is a ground floor. You see the parking and the gardens, and also some social area are kind of arranged to encourage the people to encounter to each other. So based on that, also we kind of create this Shichigahama community residence. We divided this huge recovery housing into small clusters, surrounded this kind of a community courtyard. And then sort of created this access so that instead of coming from the back, everybody is kind of walking around this courtyard. And then there's a kind of a private terrace, and then a living room, and then private room. So there's a kind of gradient of the publicness and then also the privacy. And also in the middle, we have a community kitchen where everybody can share a meal and so on. And then this is just a diagram showing how this kind of a informal sort of a encounter will happen in a different places. The model showing so that the people can walk by, and then there's also again the sunshine issue. The sun has to come in, and also we created a plan so that there's a window from both sides, and because of this, you can actually select where you want to be to adjust the level of the privacy by yourself. The biggest question is, though, even though we have this kind of a design and try ourselves so hard to revitalize the community, or at least to create some sort of a first step to, by stimulating the people to interact with each other. But can really it work? Architecture can really contribute to create such a relationship? I'm not still sure, because after looking at what happened in the building that I designed, some are really working, but some are not working. So it's really kind of makes you feel like how much architecture can do. And I just mentioned about this sense of wa and sense of sort of the kind of mentality that Japanese has towards the creation, sort of harmony. I'm not sure if that was a really special, unique sort of a feeling among the Japanese, but it kind of made them kind of help themselves in this chaotic situation. But throughout the recovery process, where actually there are lots of governmental decision needs to be made, and a lot of plan was actually enforced through top down, that might work to let the government do what they wanted, and then ended up maybe killing this kind of a strength in a community itself. And then only places that Reconstruction was really sort of a successful in a true sense was where this kind of a sense of community was really strong, and then being able to push against such kind of enforced plan. So at this moment, I think Tohoku area is losing its population. And I don't think it's going to go back to where it was. But still, the only hope is to somehow find a way to reinforce this sense of work or sense of relationship within the community. Well, this is actually the end of my talk, and then maybe I'll just do this appendix a little bit. So after all of this, we started to do the collaboration with 11 universities on the Pacific Rim to think about future environment against the disaster. And based on the lesson learned from Tohoku. And as you know, there's so many different types of disaster that we are facing now, and there's lots of sort of interesting studios run in this collaborative, international collaboration. And these are the people who participated, and there are many sort of events happened, including students' conference and so on. And this, unfortunately, we had to do this through the COVID. When we announced it, the COVID started, but then, and at the end, we actually created the exhibition to introduce all the work. And based on the experience of Tohoku, we sort of created this idea of regenerative urbanism as a way to actually handle, as a way to design the disaster resilient city. I guess I'm not going to get into that much, but I just wanted to show off about this exhibition. And by looking into this well, you will see the video of proposed new city by 11 universities. And then the purpose of this exhibition is to introduce this new idea of the city and introduce the effort by 11 universities, but also, most importantly, to tell everybody who comes here that we are exposed to the disaster every day. And it is very important to participate in thinking about the disaster. And this exhibition will run until 24th of this month. So if you happen to be in Japan, please come to join us. Thank you.
Sorry, hello. Thank you so much for that amazing lecture. Sorry, this might be a little long, but it ends with a question. So I really appreciated the presentation because it somehow provides a demonstration of a course of action in response to a catastrophe or disaster. No? We see the importance of mutual aid networks for survival. Mutual aid and cooperation-based networks in the absence of public and private institutions because of the nature of that disaster. I think here the case of COVID in neighborhoods like where I live became also another example of how mutual aid networks of, regular citizens, mom and pop stores with food, restaurants, etc., started creating a network to support the families that were most affected by the COVID catastrophe for them, by providing food and so on. No? And so the way that you present architecture here also, in a way, reminds me of a phrase of the poet Erika Hunt, no? Of art as a performance of hope in the face of catastrophe. And hopefully maybe we can see architecture also as a sort of practice of hope. And this, I think, is an example of that. In this case, the catastrophe, as you mentioned, is an earthquake with tsunami and its aftermath, and there is a lot that we can learn from this response to catastrophe when we extrapolate it maybe to other disasters, as you mentioned, and catastrophes, but maybe that we could consider having different temporalities, maybe slower catastrophes or slower coming catastrophes. And even extrapolatable to other contexts. For example, the architectures that result from racist planning in the earlier part of the 20th century in this country, the strategies that continue to, planning and spatial strategies that continue to dispossess black and brown working class people globally, not only here, no? From privatization of basic public services and resources to various forms of institutional violence, settler colonialism, gentrification, police brutality, etc. These are also axes of catastrophe. And so the emergency reactions and strategies and plans like the ones that you shared with us could inform the ways in which we can imagine a response to all of these other catastrophes that have different temporalities and different contexts when we see these urban forms of institutional violence as catastrophes, no? And so could you tell us, now the question. So first, thank you so much, because this, I think, offers a way of seeing our immediate environment with a new light in ways in which various articulations of grassroots organizations and institutions can suddenly enact a plan, an emergency plan to respond in a humane way to a catastrophe. So I wonder if you can talk about these articulations, no? Where the funding would come from, how NGOs, humanitarian aid organizations, partnerships with government agencies and grassroots organizations and community organizations that were, and you were mentioning the success of the areas that were, more community-based and had that that you mentioned, no? If you can speak a little bit to those articulations, those institutional and para-institutional articulations that made possible something as beautiful as Archaea.
To be honest, it was really hard to hear you. So I'm kind of guessing what you said. But so I kind of talk about this lecture. I wish if I could organize it much better. But basically, this is trying to say that the kind of failure, there's a possibilities and a failure. If you look at it, we saw there's such a huge possibility that in the community resilience that the Japanese people actually presented right after the disaster. So as an architect, also there are many people got together and they didn't get paid, right? They collaborated. So we thought maybe there's a way to change things. There's a way that we can do, the cell phone, all these kind of personal devices, and also the people started to be aware, and then the architects are connected, students. So maybe we can do something really different to change the course of reconstruction and design something towards the future. But then, as you can see with the seawall and also what happened, there's a huge sort of not a pushback, like a troop of sort of money and people sent by the government. And basically, marching through this kind of a weak sort of autonomous connection of the people, and then just push it out. And then as an architect, even though we saw the opportunity, but only thing we could do at the end was to really trying to help to reinforce such kind of a personal connections, I kind of made it up like a wa, because I didn't know how to call it. So I said, let's call it wa. But wa means ring, and one meaning also the the number that add up, right? So I thought wa. So wa didn't really. It just raised when the big force was not there. Once they come back, it was basically wiped out, and only certain area with a coincidence, there are some kind of strong voice, or there are some strong entity, could find out. Like a Kamaishi's case, Toyo Ito was assigned by the government, and then he actually had a power to listen to the local residents. So I'm sure there's a way to do this much cleverly. There's a way to somehow to connect these individuals and then use that to alter the policies and then approach. But this time we couldn't do it. There's 228 architects together, but unfortunately we didn't know how to deal with it. Two, even though you knew like how to fight, but you couldn't win. And also there's lots of there are many organizations, not only Archaea. Remember the architecture for, what was the Cameron's Architecture for Humanity was there. Then the problem was the Architecture for Humanity was like a parachute coming down. So they couldn't find a way to be connected to the local people. And then there's other also non-profits, but it just, something was missing. And then I think there must be the way to sort of address urban design through point of this collectiveness, but this time, we weren't ready yet. Sorry, I'm not maybe answering your question. But.
It's so hard to see what you showed us, that, this must have been sea communities, that live with the sea, that live on the sea, live from the sea. And that wall is just like the saddest thing I've ever seen. It is so mean in a way. It's like the people got punished for the tsunami.
Right.
But the tsunami was not their fault, right? It's like, wow, is there no other way? Could you not make it like what you were saying, no? A sloping hill, and you make it green, and you just put people a little higher. Because honestly, this was one in the fourth Hyatt. So the chance that this comes back in 100 years. So for 100 years, we have to live behind the wall.
Right.
And then we're going to get this one storm, and maybe after 100 years, that wall is still standing and will be still strong enough to now fight this one tsunami we might get maybe in 100 years. So it is like unreal. I don't know do you know how the government thought this was a good idea?
I mean, after the devastation was so big, so people were so scared. And then also after the disaster, what happens is, I really want back my life before, right? And then there's an area that I used to live. There's only foundation left. How can we go back there? Easiest solution is, there's a wall, you're okay, you can go back. Just really crazy. But
did they go back? Yeah? People went back behind the wall?
Some people went back, but it's horrible to live in front of a concrete wall, right? So that's why there are many people who has been struggling, and they lost lots of population. They are still losing. I mean, even this area was losing its population before the earthquake. So it's sad, actually.
Thanks. So I guess I have an optimistic and a less optimistic comment. The optimistic one is it's extraordinarily refreshing to hear what you and your colleagues in architecture are doing for communities like this. And there are obviously going to be more and more communities like this as the range of disasters from global warming and such increases. And so I'm just really impressed at seeing all of the work. The less optimistic one, and you just alluded to it, is that my understanding is most of the communities along this coastline have lost many of the younger generation over the years who have left these communities and gone to Tokyo. The population is aging, old already and aging, and the picture you just had up is like 4 people under 70, I think, and everyone else is old. And these are economically deprived areas. So I guess the pessimistic part of me wonders whether, even with all of the money and goodwill and willingness to engage to rebuild these communities, whether in the end the demographic changes suggest that it's just hopeless. Communities not coming back in these areas. These are communities, sadly and unfortunately, and maybe the wall is symbolic of the fact that these communities were dying before the triple disaster, and that in a sense was arguably the last nail in the coffin.
Maybe, the answer to that is, let's see, I just need one image. Okay, this is Osika Peninsula, right? And then this is where all the group went to. So there's one university this way. You can see the name of the university, Yokohama by Kojima-san, Kyoto, Osaka, Tokyo Daigaku, Nagoya, Kanagawa, Hosei Tokyo, Tsukuba, all this, right? And the reason everybody went to this small, basically the small, the fishing village is because one is they have a totally different context, but also they never collaborated. They don't really collaborate. And what if there's a future can be designed, they should collaborate. They form some sort of a union of the fishermen and maybe create one incredible fishing village by using all the money coming in, right? And then plan for the future. But what happened was that everybody was competing against each other to get more money. And what happened was also the mechanism of funding in Japan is central government directly deal with the local, the government or town. And the state has nothing to do with it. So that means you have a better proposal than the other community, then you can get more money. That encourage more competition rather than the collaboration. So so at the end, they couldn't form even the fishermen's union to work together, even after the disaster. So I wish actually it was a huge opportunity also. It was a disaster, but also a huge opportunity for this area to reorganize everything towards the future. But, didn't work that way. Everybody wanted to have what they used to have back. So it was, there's a lot of people actually involved in even this summer program we did.
Yeah. I have a question regarding the Arai social housing. So as I was looking at the Arai social housing and thinking about how the residents are organized around these different paths and the central courtyard, I thought of the Dojunkai. And I know they're entirely different things, and the Dojunkai date from the beginning of the 20th century, but in a way I had a reaction thinking, is there any connection, potential connection in terms of living style, seeing around a courtyard, being able to see one's neighbor and potentially having a community?
This one is designed to basically increase the interaction of the residents as much as possible. So that was based on that. So maybe we looked at the dojunkai, to learn, but I don't really remember. It was just, the how to maximize the way people kind of say hello to each other was a theme. And I think this was a successful one because it was also the city involved and they could design also the resident. So.
Thank you.
Sorry to monopolize the front row here, but we'll get it back to the other. Thank you, Professor Abe, for a great talk. Following up on Arai, it seems to me that, yeah, this is an example of super success. And where you don't have success, it strikes me, is the large-scale problem which you began with, and that is the urban planning part. So I guess my question is, do I hear correctly in what you're telling us is that, I mean, I'm less sort of inclined to sort of bring out why and talk about certain circumstances in Japan that are special in that sense, but it strikes me that you're giving us a very interesting vision of one thing that I've always, I mean, I'm not an architect, but I've always heard about the problem in Japan in building, and that is there's no urban planning, or the structures in place, the political structures are not conducive. They haven't been, and it sounds like they still aren't in place. And I guess I would just like you to comment on that. Is that really one of the big issues here? And is Japan particularly peculiar for that problem for architects such as yourself who want to do larger scale? I mean, you clearly can have great success in this small scale when the bureaucrats in Tokyo leave you alone. But the moment you move out of this, 1 acre area and try to do something bigger, then in comes the army, right, from the central command. Is that a proper characterization?
In case of architectural, I mean the Reconstruction master plan, right? The architects were not the initial sort of action maker. It was a civil engineer, because it is about how to protect the town from the wave. And then these civil engineer somehow doesn't like architects. We are naive and we are sort of too soft. So all the master plan was drawn by the civil engineer. If you remember the section of the landscape, so there was like boom, 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 boom. It's completely sort of based on the grid that they provide without looking into the landscape and the uniqueness of the area. They are mathematically driven and efficiency driven, and also they have some kind of template to apply. And because there's so much sort of an area needs to be done, so those troops came in and then put. Then the residents was told this is what needs to be done. So this place will be safe. So we are the one who came in as a volunteer, saying, maybe you shouldn't do this. This is better, and it becomes sometimes trouble because that might delay the process. If you just agree, they will give you money and then they will just finish your reconstruction. But if you argue, that will delay the process. You might become some kind of a person who is actually distracting harmony, right? So that becomes a big problem. So, and in this case, the becomes more negative and than the positive.
And is it something peculiar? Yeah, I'm sorry, is it something peculiar? I mean, I don't know the circumstance of the United States, but would you say this sort of civil engineer versus the architects is particularly of a problem in Japan? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it is historical.
No. Worldwide. Okay.
But in this case, very big.
Yeah.
Also the history of coastline management. I'm sorry, I was just going to say, my memory of the coastline of Japan, for 75 years has been managed with concrete. So there's an attitude coming into all of this of how big is the wall? Not should there be a wall or should there be two walls? It's, how tall do I make it? And how much money did the concrete company get? And
Again,
all of that.
the opportunity was presented to the local community. So if you don't like it, you can. But then the problem is many people want to have everything to be safe and secured as soon as possible. So depending on the political situation, depending on the social situation, the project was determined. Just think, raising whole town by 10 meters is like a lot of money is involved. And can't you spend that money for something else? But
What I was thinking about is that there was once a study done by Rem Koolhaas where he put the whole of Holland in one tower. And it turned out that we have so few people that if you made one big massive tower somewhere out of the flood zone, you could house them all. And I was thinking what I love about your project, in a way, you're densifying all the single houses they had before, right? Like you have not a massive density, but a really beautiful kind of mid-density project. So in a way, you could say, in Holland, we have this thing where we just let it flood. So you could say, make a park in front of the ocean,
right,
deep enough to the flood zone, take all the little single houses, densify them in your project, which you're already doing,
right,
and just move over a little bit, right?
Right.
Like why the wall is such a crazy, because first you live beautifully at the ocean, and now you live beautifully behind the wall. You could have just retracted back into the country, densify it a slight bit, and just have this, right? You could have had this all. It's kind of an interesting one to me. Like, I don't understand why you have to do this if you could just pull back a little bit up on the hills, right? So it's in, and then have your slightly more
it's
dense.
all happened from this diagram.
Yeah.
This guy, once you determine this math, applied to the site,
yeah, that's the end of it.
then you have to either raise the ground or move it.
Yeah.
That kills the existing context of the town at all.
Yeah.
I mean, totally.
Yeah, you can only move back, I think, like up the hill, and then just have a park along the ocean.
So the Kamaishi's case with the one that Toyohito was involved, so the, see, it looks kind of horrible as a diagram, but they created the landscape so that this area is protected, and then there's a continuous sort of a landscape happening, and then this becomes some kind of a place to kind of accept the water. So it's a, yeah, you're right. It has to be more flexible, and it creates a more dynamic boundary between ocean and the land. But unfortunately, it didn't happen, or it maybe happened at the Cebu area. You can see the sketch there, right? So that the
It's not all of the there's not much place to go. Just give them a landscape. Yeah, the hills are pretty steep.
right, but still,
Steal some of that work. I mean, why can't you build that wall? Earth moving will certainly be a little bit easier, cheaper. You know what I mean? It's all, of course, it's all difficult, but that wall is not easy either. How much money did they spend? $140 million. So a few bulldozers can do also.
I think they spend a lot of money. I mean, this one is kind of this called green triangle, so you can see that they try to protect this part of the town by creating sort of a green, sort of a hill, which is a little bit maybe in shape, but this is little too exaggerated because of the scale, right? It's not that small, so then this becomes like there's a first line of the defense and a second line of the defense here. But anyway, I think we will continue anyway. So thank you.
Thank you.